The ocean is full of secrets, lost ships, ghostly signals, distress calls that shouldn't exist. But this was something else. It was a cargo ship, the SS Harbinger, drifting aimlessly in the South Pacific, its massive hull cutting silently through the waves. It should have been alive with activity. Crewmen moving, radios humming, the endless groan of steel shifting against the water. But when a passing tanker spotted it, something was wrong. No distress calls, no crew on deck, no movement at all, just floating. Silent. Waiting. The Coast Guard was alerted. The nearest vessel was still hours away. But there was another option. A team of divers was already in the area, investigating a nearby wreck. They were ordered to approach, to board the ship, to find out what happened. When their boat reached the Harbinger, the divers felt it immediately. The air was unnaturally still. The waves were calm, yet the ship barely rocked. The massive steel hull was covered in rust, but not a single barnacle, not a single sign of marine life. It was as if the ocean itself was avoiding it. One of the divers grabbed his radio. "We're approaching the ladder. No response from the deck, no movement at all." The wind picked up, or at least it should have. But there was no sound, no seagulls, no waves slapping against the hull, just the divers breathing, and the faint, unseen weight of something watching. They climbed aboard. The deck was empty. No crew, no signs of activity. The smell of salt and rust filled the air, but there was something else beneath it, something wrong. And as they moved deeper into the ship, past the lifeboats that had never been launched, past the hallways lined with abandoned tools and open doors, they found them. And they wished they hadn't. The ship wasn't empty, not completely. The divers found them, the crew, all of them. But not a single one was alive. They were exactly where they should have been. One man was at the helm, his hands frozen over the wheel. Another sat in the mess hall, slumped over his tray, a half-eaten meal still in front of him. A mechanic lay in the engine room, his back against the steel wall, wrench still clutched in his grip. And yet, there was no struggle, no wounds, no blood, nothing, just bodies, perfectly intact, perfectly dead. One of the divers checked a crewman's pulse, his fingers pressing against cold skin. No heartbeat. But what made them step back in horror was the expressions on their faces, frozen in place, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide, unblinking. The way someone looks when they see something they can't understand, something impossible, something that kills without a touch. The radio room was worse. The distress call had been sent from here. A single crewman sat at the console, slumped forward, his hand still gripping the microphone. His mouth was open, jaw stretched unnaturally wide, as if he'd died mid-scream. The divers pried his fingers away from the mic, one by one. And that's when they noticed the recording system was still running. The last distress call was never finished, but the tape was. And it wasn't silence that filled it. They rewound it. Listened. At first, it was just static. Then, a voice, the captain. "Mayday!" A burst of distortion. "Something is wrong." A sound, not feedback, not machinery. A whisper. Low, twisting, speaking words none of them recognized. And then, the captain's voice changed. No longer frantic, no longer desperate. Just one sentence. "It sees you." And then, the tape cut out. One of the divers backed away from the console. His breathing was too fast. His oxygen tank hissed in the silence. Something killed them. Another diver swallowed hard. But how? No one had an answer. But in the stillness of the ship, in the silence that pressed in from all sides, they all felt it. Something was still here. Something hadn't left. And they had just been seen. The divers were losing their nerve. Everything about the ship felt wrong. The air was heavy, the silence too deep, like the walls were holding their breath. And the crew, the way they died without a mark, without a struggle. Something had done this, something they couldn't see. But maybe the captain could. The ship's logbook was still in his cabin, resting neatly on his desk. The pages were dry, untouched, as if someone had placed it there, knowing it would be found. One of the divers picked it up, flipping to the last few entries. The handwriting was steady at first. Then, it changed. The words grew shaky, uneven, like the captain had been writing with a trembling hand. And the entries stopped making sense. The first strange log was 2 days before the ship was found. Something is wrong. We are not alone. The crew hears voices at night. I tell them it's just the wind. I don't believe it myself. The divers kept reading. The next entry was the following night. We saw something in the water. No distress calls, no ships nearby, but we saw the shape, drifting in the waves. It was watching us. Then the radio went silent. I keep thinking I hear my own voice, whispering. The last log was one sentence, written over and over, as if the captain had tried to fight the urge to write it, but couldn't stop. Don't look at it. Don't let it know you see. Don't look at it. Don't let it know you see. Don't let it know you see. The words bled into each other. The ink was smeared, like the captain had been shaking uncontrollably as he wrote, or like he had been pulled away before he could finish. The divers lowered the book. No one spoke. Then, a sound, a sharp, metallic clang from deep within the ship. Something had shifted. Something was still moving below deck. And suddenly, the captain's final words weren't just a warning. They were a command. Don't look at it. Don't let it know you see. The divers had a choice. Turn back, or go deeper. Into the belly of the ship, into the dark. They should have left. But something was pulling them forward, something they needed to see. They reached the cargo hold. The steel doors hung open, the space beyond swallowed in shadows. The air was thick, carrying the scent of seawater, rust, and something else. Something rotten. A feeling settled over them, like they had just stepped into a place they were never meant to find. Then they saw the crates, massive, stacked high. Some were still sealed, their surfaces marked with symbols, not letters, not numbers, just a circle, with a single eye in the center. One of the crates was broken open. Something had splintered the wood from the inside. The divers stepped closer, shining their flashlights into the crate's hollow interior. It was empty. Whatever had been inside was gone. One of them whispered, "What were they carrying?" Another diver shook his head. "I don't think it was cargo." Then what? A pause. Then, a passenger. The words hung in the air. The ship groaned around them, the deep, aching metal of a place that wanted them to leave. And then, something moved, a faint scraping sound from the far end of the hold, slow, deliberate, like something was dragging itself across the steel floor. One of the divers swung his flashlight. The beam landed on the farthest crate, and just for a second, they saw it. A hand, long, pale, not human, reaching around the edge of the crate. The fingers curled, twitched, and then it was gone. The diver holding the flashlight stumbled back. "Did you see that?" No one answered, because they all had, and that's when they realized the ship wasn't silent anymore. The floor above them creaked. Slow, shuffling footsteps moving toward the stairwell. They weren't alone, and whatever had been in those crates wasn't gone. The divers were done. Whatever was in the ship, whatever had been in those crates, it wasn't gone. It was awake, and it knew they were here. They turned back, rushed toward the exit. The floor beneath them groaned, the ship's walls shuddering like something was breathing. Then, a sound crackled over their radios. Faint, distorted, but growing louder. Not static. A voice that shouldn't exist. One of the divers froze, his hand shot to his radio. "Do you hear that?" Another crackle. Then, the captain's voice. But the captain was dead. "We should have never opened it." The voice was weak, frantic. "We should have left it in the dark." The divers stared at each other, because the radio wasn't playing a past recording. The voice was speaking now. "It's still here. It's still here. It's still here." The words warped, stretching longer and deeper, twisting into something else. Then, a new voice. Lower. Wrong, breathing between the static. "It sees you." The divers ran. They climbed the ladder, scrambled back onto their boat. The ship loomed behind them, dark and empty. But they knew it wasn't empty. They cut the rope. The boat's engine roared to life. The divers looked back one last time. And in the darkness, the ship's radio sparked, and from deep inside the hull, they heard it. A knock. Slow, deliberate, like something waiting to be let out. Then, the ship's floodlights flickered on, blinding white. And in that second, just before their boat sped away, one of the divers saw a figure standing on the deck, watching them leave. Tall, still, smiling. The SS Harbinger is still drifting, still waiting. And somewhere out there, the distress call is still playing.